Welcome to the World Cup Mood Board here on 99.94. Just as it looked like we might be in for a tense finish at Perth, Marcus Stoinis, hometown boy, smacking the ball everywhere. Sri Lanka were building some pressure, largely because of some good bowling from their seamers and Tikshana, and also because of Aaron Finch's inability to remember how to make any runs or be dismissed. Stoinis certainly had other ideas, and in fact, it was Maxwell, I suppose, that started it with a couple of big smacks as well. It was quite clear that they had a plan, the Australian team, even if Aaron Finch had not read that plan or was not aware of it, or maybe wasn't in the room when they came up with it, from what I could tell. Stoinis made the second fastest T20 World Cup 50 ever. Confused myself then. T20 50 ever. The fastest for Australia off 17 balls. I think the fastest is still Yuvraj Singh. I don't know if you've seen that innings. That one's fun. It was a dramatic reversal of form for Australia against spin bowling, which has been a real weakness of theirs in recent T20 cricket, as we will come into this graph now. Did you want me to say 1.2, Muku? I'll say 1.2, Muku. 1.2. Australia as a team averaged under 20 against spin bowling. So you can see the graph just up here in the top left-hand corner. Australia is the one on the top. So there are teams that are worse against spin. Certainly West Indies has been really, really poor, which we might get onto that one later on. And there's certainly been some other teams who have struggled with it in many different ways. But essentially, there's absolutely no doubt that Australia has been pretty ordinary against it now for a long time, while Sri Lanka's spinners, of course, have been fantastic, especially those two core spinners of Tikshana and Hasaranga. And on paper, at least, this could have been a bad matchup for Australia. However, Perth is not really a place where you can bowl. Perth is not a place that traditionally spinners go that well for. So in that particular case, it was not ideal, but there's no doubt that Stoinis and Maxwell were going after them. Maxwell has a very good record against the spinners. Against Sri Lanka, 1.3. I don't know if Muku can get that to work or not. He's frantically sending me messages. But Maxwell averages 48 against Sri Lanka and strikes at 176, and his career figures were 28 and 151. His top score against Sri Lanka in T20 cricket was 145 from 65 balls at Pallekele. So he certainly started the movement today, but it was no doubt Stoinis played a big role. It was Hasaranga that I think was the one who really got done over by Maxwell, of course. 2 6s and 2 4s. Even Mitchell Marsh got involved with him, and then eventually Stoinis would get involved. But that was where Maxwell weren't very good. But by the end of the game, Stoinis's figures just kind of destroyed the Sri Lankan spinners. Sorry, getting all my words mixed up there. Hasaranga went at 17.7 runs and over. He conceded 53 runs from the 3 overs that he was allowed to bowl. And it's worth noting that of the 2 specialist spinners, the ones who have been so good for Sri Lanka, first ball, Tikshana got David Warner out, and it looked like the old days of Australian cricket, or even the modern days, if you look at that graph up there in the corner, were about to come back again. And Marcus Stoinis, Glenn Maxwell just bashed those old days right out of Perth Stadium. All right, on to Mitchell Starc. So he was not used in the first over today. That in itself is kind of a very remarkable thing. And before you say, well, Finn Allen changed Australia's policy, well, Starc didn't bowl the first over in a warm-up game in Canberra either. However, the last time that he hadn't bowled the first over for Australia before then was a very long time ago. As you can see here, 2014 was the last time. He actually played, that's 3 World Cups ago, by the way, if you need to do it in that kind of maths. 34 straight occasions when he played a T20 international for Australia, he took the first over. So you can see him by bowling positions across the screen here. It's ridiculous how often he actually bowled the first over in a row. There could be a few reasons for this. One might be that Australia, by picking him to bowl the first over every time, it actually makes the opposition, game plan Australia just a little bit easier. And so it could be a tactical thing. I don't think that's why it is. I think there's a few other possibilities. The one that I'm probably going with is that I think that Starc is a different bowler than he used to be. He's actually become more of a wobble ball bowler of recent times. And generally, when you start to bowl and that's more in Test cricket, of course, but once you start to bowl the wobble ball, unless you're a master craftsman at it, Muhammad Asif or Jimmy Anderson, it actually is hard from then on in to swing the ball normally as much. And so I think that because of that, if he's not swinging the ball as much anymore, then there is a very good chance that he will be bowling up front. Won't make as much sense for him because he's not going to get that extravagant swing that he used to get. And with Hazelwood in the side, it's like, it just makes sense to just give him the new ball. And they've also got Cummins available to them for that as well. Aaron Finch could bowl it. Glenn Maxwell could bowl it. They've got a few different options. So I think the days of Starc being an automatic bowler at the first over have completely gone based on what Australia have done recently. It is worth saying also that Starc has changed as a T20 bowler from what he once was. And that's partly because he plays so little T20 cricket. So if you look at this snazzy thing right here, you can see around 2011, 2012, 2014, and 15, that's quite a lot of games. Mitchell Starc was playing a lot. By 2017, that's 0. I think he played 1 in 2018, if I'm remembering correctly from the original. He basically went through a whole period where he didn't play much. And then you can see they've tried to amp him back up again when they've started playing World Cups. And I think because of that, he's just not that good. Remember also, in case you've lost all memory of how the world works, 2017 and 2018, that isn't COVID either. And there was a couple of injuries in there at times that slowed him down, but this is not how he looks for Test cricket, right? Like, they made a decision to play him in less T20 cricket. And if you look at this next graph that we're about to show you now, you may have forgotten just how good he was at T20 cricket. At times. In fact, you might have forgotten how good he was at white ball cricket altogether. In 2015, Mitchell Starc was the player of the tournament when Australia won that World Cup. In 2019, I would argue he was even better in that particular tournament. But in T20s during 2012, Starc played in 28 T20 matches across the Big Bash, the Blast, the World Cup, and the Champions League. In all of those, he took 59 wickets at just under an average of 12. Yeah, his economy was 6.5 and he took a wicket every 11 balls. If you're thinking that that's a fluke year or helped by low quality competitions, in 2015, he played in 14 matches, took 21 wickets at just over 15 and went at 6.87, taking a wicket every 13 balls. Sorry, if we could just go back to that graph that Muku's just moved away from for a second there. And in that particular year, almost everything was in the IPL except for one game against England. Those are the ones down the bottom left-hand corner, right? Those are the ones that are just absolutely extraordinary years for any bowler to have. And he's had 3 of them in T20 cricket. He's then had a bunch, as you can see in this middle period here, where he's averaged mid-20s and some years going at, low 7s to mid-7s. Again, for a normal bowler, these are exceptional years. There was one year where he went at a little bit more runs. 2021 is this one at the top right-hand corner. Sorry, we forgot to put the years on this one. But you can see right at the top corner here, and that was 2021. That is unquestionably the worst year of T20 cricket in Mitchell Starc's career. He's averaging mid-30s and going at almost 9 and over. It almost feels like it doesn't belong with the rest of the years. He's changed as a T20 bowler. And if you go to the next slide that we're going to show you, you can see that from 2012 to 2016, and that's the period when he stops playing a lot of cricket. And from 2017 to 2009, from 2017 to current day, or 2018 to current day, because he didn't play a game in 2017. You can see that he is still Mitchell Starc. He hasn't become suddenly a terrible bowler, but there's absolutely no doubt looking at these numbers that he is not the bowler that he was before. Right, his average has skyrocketed from ridiculous illegal numbers to solid numbers. And also his runs per 18 balls has gone up quite a bit as well. So he doesn't take the wickets that he used to, which is another reason why if he's not taking those wickets as much, it doesn't make the same kind of sense to give him that first over, at least automatically. Of course, he's still Mitchell Starc. You still want him in the team. Australia aren't about to find another beanpole left-arm seamer with his pace and experience coming up. So they've decided to move him into what I suppose we would call the enforcer middle overs role. And that's what he did today. And I thought he was absolutely outstanding at that. He took 1 for 23 from his 4 overs, which included 5 wides at one point as well. In the death as well. He just kind of threw that one away down there. The interesting thing is that I've always thought that Pat Cummins works best in that enforcer's role in the middle. And now it looks like they're moving Mitchell Starc there. So we'll see more Pat Cummins up the top. And we'll probably see less of Mitchell Starc swinging it. Although they might just pick him as a surprise occasionally when teams aren't expecting it. But there you go, Mitchell Starc. And considering we're talking about pace bowling, let's just move on to the Sri Lankan pace bowlers here. Sri Lanka are missing most of their first choice seam bowlers right now. Dilshan Madashankar is their young left arm seamer, who I was hoping would have a decent tournament. He was gone before a game was played. Chimera, their quick, he is gone as well. And Pranod Madashan is there and might play later in the tournament, but currently has a dodgy hamstring. That's not ideal to turn up to Perth with, right? Like, this is already bad. And of course, they made it worse when their backup left arm pacer, Binura Fernando, got injured after 5 balls as well. With all this in mind, it should have been much easier for Australia, especially at Perth. However, Lahiru Kumara was bowling incredibly well tonight. The figures, no one's going to really remember this game for him, but he was outstanding. He was quick, he was skillful. He cut Finch in half so many times that essentially Finch was diced by the end of this innings. It was phenomenal. He also hit Glenn Maxwell on the throat. We've seen a lot of fast bowling do well in this tournament so far, but this specifically was really, really interesting to watch. But again, it shows how hard it is for Sri Lanka to be successful in this tournament when so many of their frontline seamers are not available to them. And tonight they had to have a part-time spinner come in, but they also had their is he bowling arounder? I suppose he's bowling arounder. Come in and bowl his full quota. All those sorts of things. It's just not working the way that they would want it to right at the moment. Let's just have a look at the World Cup average versus pace. So it's very early on in this tournament so far. So this, we all know that. But I'm just saying, if you look at the numbers at the moment, this currently has, for pace bowlers, has the second lowest batting average that we've ever seen in a World Cup. 2010 is the only tournament that has had a lower average so far. Now, there's a lot of things that can be said about this because it is so early on. Also, I would say in Australia, there's been quite a few of leg buys and wides and bounces that have gone over the top of the wicketkeeper's head. But it is worth noting that if you look at the next slide, what has been really interesting so far is that the best place to bowl in this World Cup has been length. And not by a little bit, right? Like, length is comfortably averaging under 20 so far. And if you look at the short ball, this is Australia, you can see that length is, miles away from that. So it really has been a really good place to bowl. Now, the interesting thing about length is on most T20 TV shows, they'll replace the word length with slot, right? That's the slot. And yet it's not going that way in this World Cup. Part of this, of course, comes from my theory on the reinforced seam of the Kookaburra balls, means that teams can bowl a little bit more full, and they're getting the seam movement. You could see today, even in Perth, there was seam movement, and that's probably not what you expect from a white ball in Perth. The other thing to remember is that these are not normal Australian wickets. They haven't been baked by the hot sun. This isn't the middle of summer. This is October. A few weeks back, these were footy grounds, right? Even putting aside our old friend El Ninas, I've really got to remember what that is. But, this is not summer in Australia. So Shield teams often moan about early season games for the same sort of reasons in Australia. And we know that Rohit Sharma told the press that he wasn't sure how the MCG wicket was going to handle because they had all this data on how the MCG was for Big Bash games, but that's all January, February, December. They're now playing in October, the first wicket of the year. No one's really had any idea. So this is just not when you usually play T20 cricket in Australia. And as it currently goes, if you're a seam bowler and you're hitting a good length consistently, the chances are you're going to you're going to be quite successful. The only thing I would say is that so far, the majority of this tournament has been played in this southern part of Australia, which is, even less summery than, far less summery than the rest of the country. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as we move around. But that game at Perth, we still saw seam movement early on. So it's worth keeping an eye out for. All right, on to the Sri Lankans. Kusal Mendis is the current leading scorer at this World Cup. We saw similar things with the Sri Lankan players last time because they played the qualifiers, so they actually get the chance to do very well. Last time, I think it was the top run scorers and the top wicket takers for a long time with Sri Lanka just because they had the extra 3 games that everyone else did. But he is leading it, and he went to Perth today, and he would have thought, well, this is a great chance for me to pull out the pull shot. And I say that because Kusal Mendis plays the pull shot all the time, everywhere, no matter what the conditions are like. So for him, Perth should have been like his spiritual home, right? It's not that uncommon for a shorter player to play the pull shot as much as he does, but even then, he uses it more than most, especially when you consider that most of his career is played on wickets that don't bounce that much. There was no way that he wasn't going to look for it in Perth. Sadly for him, he spooned one straight up in the air and was caught early on. But he does use it more than most. And if you have a look here, all T20 players play the pull shot around 8% of the time, right? And he's playing it at well over 12% of the time, meaning that he's around 55% more often than any other player, than the average player in T20 cricket. This is a man who loves his pull shot. This is a man who went to Perth, and I now feel genuinely disappointed for him. Imagine going all the way to Western Australia and getting out almost straight away playing your favourite shot that is almost not invented there, but made for those conditions. That feels unfair. Talking about going all the way to Western Australia, Hobart to Perth. That ain't no trip to Cleveland. Australia obviously have their first win on the board, but in truth, they started with a pretty massive advantage over Sri Lanka in this particular game. I don't think the Sri Lankans are going to be thanking whoever designed the schedule up. They went from Geelong, and then they went down to Hobart. Fine, similar. Then they went from Hobart to Perth. Hopefully on a direct flight. I didn't check, but there are some direct flights there after they beat Ireland in their last game. But a 5-hour flight in the middle of a tournament, anyone playing in Perth, I think, is going to have some trouble. If you just look, though, conditions-wise, they couldn't be any more different, Hobart and Perth. Although, I will say this, it was very cold in Perth today. People were wearing jumpers. I'm not sure that ever happens. The point, though, is that the wickets are quite different. We all know that you're going to have, there's a lot of teams who are going to have to play in Perth. And a bit like, Sri Lanka got one net session before they went. There's going to be a lot of teams having to do that. To have to do that, though, and play the hosts over there when you haven't been preparing and you've had to fly straight over. I mean, we've seen test teams completely fall apart playing in Perth when they've had preparation. It's a different kind of surface. The ball does bounce higher there than anywhere else. And so there's absolutely no doubt that they were at a competitive disadvantage in that particular game. Having said all that, Australia played well in this game, but not as well as probably they were hoping, but they certainly played quite well in this game. Considering everything that went against Sri Lanka in this game, they should be absolutely over the moon with how well they did. They had a chance to win it, a good chunk into the second innings of that game. Part of that was inspired by Aaron Finch. And if you look back at Stoinis' early innings, there was a little bit of luck there. Edges past the keeper and, tickles down the leg side before he just started smashing the spinners everywhere. It's just worth remembering that I think they've done very well considering everything that was against them for this particular game. The injuries to their fast bowlers, the injury to their bowler in the lineup, having to travel to Perth, having to play Australia in Perth, having one warm-up net session before that. Anyway, this is becoming a weird little subplot of this World Cup. of the loopholes. Uh, 2 days on from the final over of India-Pakistan, and obviously one of the most contentious moments for that game was that India's got runs from a bowled, essentially. The point it raised on most of the so far is that there are some loopholes around dead balls specifically in cricket. A lot of these have been brought about by the fact that umpiring in international games is slightly different than umpiring in standard cricket matches because of the DRS, because of being able to go to your third or your fourth officials and all these sorts of things. If you've never seen it, I did a video on Kagisa Rabada's zombie ball dismissal a few years ago, and we'll talk about that one, but there's quite a few of these that are coming out. So scenario one, you get hit on the pads, the ball flies off to fine leg, let's say, for 4 runs, but the umpire gives you out. Turns out when the DRS comes up that you got a bottom edge on the shot, and that the ball never hit your pads at all, and the umpire was incorrect and has to reverse his decision. I even did the action. In that case, the 4 runs that you got off your bat do not count. And they don't count because from the moment that you're given out, it's a dead ball. That has happened quite a few times. I'm not sure it's ever happened on the last ball of a game. I think it's the ICC's worst nightmare that it happens on the last ball of a key game here, maybe even a final. But it's certainly something that is talked about quite a bit amongst cricketers. Scenario 2, when you're talking about waist-high no balls, essentially what happens is now, let's say you get a waist-high delivery. You're not quite sure if it is or not. You hit the ball out to deep mid-wicket and you get caught and you just stop because you've been caught. And the umpires then have a decision to make because they haven't called the no ball straight away. And the opposition can't run you out because you've been caught, and you can't make any more runs because they haven't given the actual, they haven't given it as a no ball. It's actually probably better for the umpires not on the field to give that, but it brings out up across this very weird grey area of the loopholes of again, modern international cricket. That's the one I talked about in the Rabada one video. It's really interesting if you want to go and check that out after this. And then the third one is what we saw in the India-Pakistan match. That was a bowled, but it bowled from a free hit. The ball goes off in a weird direction off the stumps and you get a run. But it could have just lodged on the stumps and Dinesh Karthik might have still made it down the other end. Think about this, because the bails are off. It's very hard to run Dinesh Karthik out. You'd have to grab the ball and the stump in your hand at the same time. So essentially we have all these different things. And these scenarios were actually pushed to Joss Butler. That's why we've got the photo of him looking confused down here. And he said, I haven't seen the press conference, so this is from Charlie. He said, after he was asked about these. And then he followed with a really long pause. And essentially he then went through those scenarios, probably not quite as snazzily as I just did. He said that things should be cleaned up a little bit more and would be, and hopefully it doesn't affect England. The thing is, the ICC have already talked about this. The MCC laws committees have talked about this. These are really tricky things of how to actually work them out. And the problem is that it can be a little bit, it's embarrassing for the ICC if it happens, as I said before, in one of those big games. So anyway, just those are the 3 main ones to look out for. Bharat Sundaresan has said that there's actually quite a few more that are worth looking at as well. So, follow Bharat Sundaresan, the umpire whisperer, out there for a few extra ones. But there you go. And just to finish up today, some big news from the West Indies. I don't think this is a complete shock considering everything that has happened. But the first domino has fallen with them, and the 2-time World Cup winning coach, Phil Simmons, has quit. He helped, obviously, shepherd their champion freelance team into the 2012 and 2016 titles. He was well ahead of T20 thinking for a long, long time, the way that he thought about the game. He's quite a dynamic player himself, which might have played a part in it. Obviously, coming from Trinidad as well, with the whole wind ball revolution. If you've never done that, Google wind ball T20 cricket. I think Tim Wigmore and Freddie Wild have written about that one before. But in this particular tournament, I mean, You could argue that his vision is no longer cutting edge, and that at times the tactics were a bit baffling. However, he was trying to coach a team with batters who don't look like they can consistently face 20, 25, 30 balls. Um, I'm not, and this tournament, if you look at the Aaron Finch innings and the Shan Masood innings, Virat Kohli's innings, the Kusal Mendis innings, Craig Irvine, we're seeing all these guys having to use all their batting skills to help the hitters and hope that they can make runs at the end, even if they're in terrible form. I'm not sure the West Indies came in with a lineup that was really set up for that. And, no one knew this tournament was going to play the way it had so far anyway. I didn't think, even if everything had gone West Indies' way, even if Shimron Hetmeyer had turned up, that this was particularly a team that was favoured to get out of this division or the group to begin with. If you have a look also at the West Indies 99.94 team over at Caribbean Cricket, I'm sure they'll be doing an emergency episode on this. They just did a whole episode where they talked about Phil Simmons, so they're going to have to go back to the grind and do another one. But they talk about in this tweet here just how many coaches they've had since the year 2000 that have quit or been sacked. It's 16. At a certain point, I think you have to admit that it's not a coach, right? What I really want to know, and it was talked about on their last episode, is what has Cricket West Indies done to build on the fact that their team was absolutely brilliant at T20 cricket for a long time? And a lot of that happened through Simmons and, of course, the freelancers playing all those leagues. But I didn't see anything from a structural point of view where they were like, well, this is working. How can we continue to facilitate this so that it keeps happening, that we keep dominating T20 cricket? It's almost like they dominated T20 cricket because the players went off and got better at it when all the players from the rest of the world weren't doing that. And they never thought, well, how can we continue this? And Darren Sammy basically said that when they won the 2016 World Cup, didn't he? He said that they won it kind of in spite of the Cricket West Indies. And look, I think it's probably fair to say that Simmons should probably have moved on from the white ball coaching duties, but also admit that I don't see him leaving as something that's going to fix anything. Certainly not everything, and maybe not anything at all. Anyway, that's the end of the World Cup mood board for today. We've got England, Ireland tomorrow. You would assume that England would have no problems there. And then we have Afghanistan, New Zealand. So unless New Zealand trip up on the spinners, again, you would expect the two favourites to win those two games. But let's get to your questions. I said that so confidently, and then I can't find anything, can I? Missed the first one. Vamasab says, Australia's three pacers have been playing across three formats for a while. Josh has improved, but Starc blows hot and cold. None of them are gun T20 bowlers. Well, I mean, it'd be harsh to say that Josh Hazlewood is not a gun T20 bowler at this stage. I mean, his last 2 years have been absolutely brilliant. If you tell me he's not a gun T20 bowler in the way that Jasper Boomer or Jofra Archer is, that's probably fair because they became specialists, far earlier than he did, and he's basically had to do this on his own. Starc has always blown hot and cold. It's just that his hot is so much better than anyone else's that quite often that changes it. Cummins is another interesting one. And when you say is there a lack of paces, it's not a lack of paces that's the problem there. Those are three absolutely outstanding, talented bowlers who could bowl in any format. But you're talking about bowlers who are bowling in all three formats, right? And consistently bowling in all three formats and have never, ever, for a long period of time, decided that T20 cricket was the most important thing to them. There's going to be more fluctuation in those players. It's the whole Ben Stokes versus Kieron Pollard thing. If you're picking a team, you would pick Kieron Pollard over Ben Stokes. No one is saying that Kieron Pollard is a more talented player than Ben Stokes, right? Kieron Pollard has played 500 T20 games, right? He knows exactly what he needs to do. He knows what his role is. He knows what he fits in. He knows what his backup role is. He knows what his fourth role is at this point. Ben Stokes, they're still trying him in different positions to try and make him work as a T20 player. That's what you're talking about with these players. It's not that there's a lack of pace bowlers. Obviously, Nathan Ellis was the, I would have thought is the best one sort of outside of that period. But these are their best three bowlers. I'm not really sure what they are supposed to do. I thought they bowled fantastically today anyway. Cummins, I thought, had a very poor last over, but I thought the other guys bowled quite well. I'm not sure that there's a What are you going to do? Bring Kane Richardson and Nathan Ellis in? I just don't think that is anywhere near the same level of these guys. Well, this is a good question. Imad says, do you think if Fernando was fit, Sri Lanka might have won this game? Yeah, it's really hard to say because obviously Danijaya De Silva doesn't bowl as early on, and maybe doesn't bowl as much. I did think that they brought him back on largely because the matchup worked. We know that Sean Marsh. We know that Mitch Marsh is not particularly good against off spin, and that Aaron Finch wasn't hitting the ball off the square. But also, did Fernando, because Fernando was injured, it was either him or it was either DDS or Shanaka, right? So which way do you go? They went with the spinner. But yeah, if you had a frontline bowler, I mean, I think a lot of things could have gone their way in this particular game. They didn't. How many times did they drop Finch? I mean, you might say that kept them in the game, but they could have put a lot more pressure on. I thought when Warner went out, I thought Australia were under a lot of pressure. Maxwell certainly took some of that off. However, can Maxwell do that if Finch is out as well? And I think that might have been the big difference in that particular game. And then, as you say, you have the ability then of having the extra seamer as well. So I think a few things went against Sri Lanka. But I'll say what I said at the end. I think it's remarkable they were that close, considering everything we know about this particular game. If it seems it spins, yeah, Shane Warne used to say that, Rahul. I'm pretty sure CricViz have said that's not true. But there are certainly some pitches that are soft that do both. But as a general rule, no. Even less so now, because when we're talking about seam bowling now, it's partly because the seam has been fixed on the ball. So it's even less to do with the actual pitches than it probably was in other times. Oh, Horse with no username says, I like this. Did Hasaranga need a match like that to teach him how to adapt to the pitch? Now, this is really interesting because I don't know how many people know this, and I'm trying to think who the writer was, but I think a few of the really good T20 analyst writers have written about the fact that part of Hasaranga's main skill is that he bowls, because he's short and he bowls with a low action, that all of his balls are hitting the stumps. And he skids through a little bit, and obviously he can still spin the ball in both directions, which bring about all those problems. You can't do those things at the whacker. And so I think it's fair that it might say that he was bowling on a similar kind of... he was bowling a similar kind of length. I think that the commentators might have said he was bowling shorter. I don't think he was. I think that the ball was just sitting up. And it's very hard to skid. There are some Australian pitches at times you can skid the ball through a little bit on. We've seen Zampa do that, for instance, on certain surfaces. I'm not sure that Perth Stadium one is one. And because it does have just so much more bounce than anywhere else. I find this really interesting. Did he do anything different? Having said that, I felt that the first couple of shots, actually, he did try and pitch the ball up more. And then Australia, I think it was Marsh to begin with, launched him, it might have been Finch as well, launched him down the ground. They decided that he wasn't going to work and that he was a weak link. And, up until that point, I thought that Australia might really struggle with the two spinners in tandem in that middle period, especially once Warner had gone out. And they clearly decided that Hasaranga had to go. I think he tried to bowl Fuller. That didn't work. I think he went back to his original length, and that didn't work. And then he didn't have a third plan. He's been so dominant. It's a bit like, when you see those young batters and they come in and they make all the runs, from the age of 6 all the way through to 21, they get to Test cricket. They make a couple of hundreds. Everyone talks them up. And then suddenly one bowler comes along and works them out. And they don't know how to fix that, because they've never dealt with failure before. They've never had to rebuild their game before, because they've always been better than everyone else. In a smaller way, I wonder if that is what happened a little bit to Hasaranga tonight. Let me just see what else we've got here. C Square says, it shows how heavily dependent Sri Lanka are on Hasaranga and Tikshana. Do you know why they failed to develop good pace talent? Well, I mean, at the moment, 4 of their 5 best T20 pace bowlers are not available to them. I think Chimera is probably a better bowler than we've ever seen, and he just hasn't had a chance to string enough games together. Plus, he hasn't had the development back home, to be able to do that through domestic leagues and everything else. But we know how good he is. I do think Madhushanka, the left arm, is a really good talent. They've also got the other guy that bowls like Malinga, who's there and thereabouts. Am I missing anyone else? I feel like I'm missing someone else as well. Obviously, Lahiri bowled well. But on a very basic level, the pitches in Sri Lanka spin more than I think anywhere else on earth. I think by a distance. There's some whole places where seam bowlers just don't bowl at all, and I think that obviously causes as much problems as anything. But in this particular case, I don't think we'd have to. I don't think we'd have to. I don't think we can blame their seam bowlers right at the moment, I suppose is the best way of putting it. This one. Man City Video says, in Australia, how do fans think on Finch? Usually they ignore him until he's being really good or really bad, which is the truth. That was an odd innings, and it's a bad sign that he continued to bat that long all the way through and probably didn't have the period that we saw. I don't know. I'm trying to think of anyone else. Even guys like Irvine and Shan Masood looked like they were hitting the ball better than that. That's probably the worst long innings we've seen in this World Cup so far. He was obviously pissed off about it the whole way through. I said from the start, I'm not sure that you can pick Finch and Smith. And in some ways, I think they've kept Finch, not just because he's the captain, and it would be huge if he went out, but also because he can hit sixes still. I did think at one stage that would have been an ideal game for Smith to have played. The problem is I don't think you can fit both of them in the team, and Finch is the captain, and that's where they're at. I will go back to what I said in that section where I talked about him before. Even as silly as this sounds, he probably, being out there and not being dismissed, allowed Maxwell and Stoinis to bat the way that they did, and Marsh, to be fair, as well. Although Marsh got stuck for a while himself, but it allowed them to go on that offensive because one person was hanging around. But yeah, look, I mean, he's quit from the one-day team. Every time they get to a World Cup, Finch seems to be in danger of being dropped, even when he's captain. I think anyone who's seen him in his prime years, was it 2016 to 2019, he was just incredible. But he's not that player anymore, and it will be interesting to see whether it matters or not throughout the rest of the tournament. And let's have a look what else we got here. Robert says, I love the mood board. Which qualifying team do you think will get the most wins in the Super 12? It probably should have been, well, I mean, it will be Sri Lanka. But I also think that Netherlands probably should have got more. I think that Netherlands are going to look back. It'd be really interesting to talk to some of the Dutch players after this tournament on how they felt about that. I'm trying to think if I know anyone in the team that I can call up, but how they felt about that Bangladesh loss. I do like the Dutch team, and they played a lot of good quality cricket of recent times. Ireland are so dependent on, Sterling, Balbirnie, and Tector finding form again, I think, to bother the top level teams. And I'm trying to think, who else is it? I've already said Sri Lanka's quite good. And I'm missing someone, aren't I? And Zimbabwe. I think Zimbabwe are a handy team, but I think Saganda Raza would have to be outstanding for them to win, multiple games from here on in. And he has been outstanding so far this tournament, but I just can't imagine that he's going to be able to keep that form up just because it's been so good. So I think Sri Lanka's the obvious one who should win the most. But Netherlands, I've still got high hopes for them. Eventually, their middle order has to turn up, right? 2 World Cups in a row. At one stage, their middle order has to turn up. Let's have a look. Harsha says, should teams start seriously considering retiring batters out tactically? Well, I mean, they already have, haven't they? It's funny you say he's a prime candidate for that today. I don't think Australia would have wanted to give that wicket up today. I really don't think. I mean, I can understand what you're saying. But as I said, when Marsh and Finch were batting together, and Marsh went out, I really thought that was a really shaky time for Australia. I'm not sure that they would have wanted Finch to go out. So when do you take him out? By the time there was a chance to take him out, Australia were already ahead of the game. So the only time they could have taken him out, I would have thought safely today and comfortably today, would have been, I'm trying to think, it would have been when Stoinis was already whacking them around and the game was safe. So I think when they got it to about, I can't remember, was it 30 off 30? It wasn't quite that, but it was roughly around those marks. That's about the first time you think to yourself, oh, I wonder if they could do that. I'm not even sure they would have thought about that. And to be honest, Stoinis batted so quickly. I did think that, I think they needed 12 off 24. And I never got a chance to tweet it, but I was thinking, if Finch faced all of these, it would go down to the last ball. If Stoinis faced all this, it would take 2 balls. But yeah, I'm not sure that this particular innings was that situation. However, if they were batting first, it might have been. I'm not sure if you do it when you're batting first, but let's have a look. So, just having a look. There's a couple of questions about Pat Cummins here. Kane Richardson and Nathan Ellis are fundamentally better T20 bowlers than Cummins. See, I don't think they're fundamentally better T20 bowlers than Cummins. I think they are T20 specialists that have worked it out in a way that Cummins hasn't. There's a couple of reasons why Cummins is in the team. One is that Kane Richardson and Nathan Ellis, against players who don't like genuine pace, just can't scare them, right? So one thing that the Australian team really likes is that they have 3 seamers who, just through their sheer, their normal best ball, can actually bother batters, right? That's one thing. The other thing is that Pat Cummins is one of the best strikers of pace bowling in the world when he's batting, which Richardson and Ellis also don't offer. And if you look at that Australian batting lineup, a little bit different with Agar in it, to be fair. But you look at that Australian batting lineup, they really do put a lot of pressure on Cummins or Starc being able to help their batting lineup look slightly better than it is. You know, they that is part of their game plan. So there is a couple of reasons there. Kane Richardson, don't make me look this up. I'm going to look this up. I have to know. Kane Richardson, I would assume, if we look at his figures, as a T20 international bowler, he goes at around 8.5, 8.2 runs and over, and averages 22 in international cricket. All right. Just a quick one off the top of my head, everyone, just to check. Pat Cummins in international T20 cricket averages 24, so slightly more than Kane Richardson, at 7.4 runs and over. So, and Kane Richardson would have played in a lot of more low-level games. And by that, I mean non-World Cups, a lot more bilaterals and those sorts of things. I actually think Kane Richardson's a really good bowler. When he's in the side, I just don't feel as comfortable as I do with Pat Cummins being in the side. I've said before, I'm not sure that the entire thing works with Cummins, but they're trying him in a new role. I actually thought he bowled quite well today, so I'm not sure whether that's a particular question at the moment, but I did think he bowled quite well today. Let me just get past all those. Let's see what else we've got here. Nisanka. The Nisanka question. Thanks. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I just think that Danijaya De Silva is a really good opener. And I wonder if the reason they don't like the two of them, him and Kusal Mendis opening together, is because Danijaya De Silva is maybe not quite as good against pace bowling, and they're both more spin specialists. I'd have to look at the numbers of Danijaya to have a look at that. But my memory of I know he can play pace, but you know there's a reason why he bats further down the order in red ball cricket and all those sorts of things. But Nisanka's not working, so is it worth just changing that up? Because then even if let's say DDS gets to 18 off 18, and then the spinners come on, and he can maybe hopefully do some more damage when the spinners come on. is that not the same as Nasanka at this stage? And then if Nasanka gets to 18 off 18, and then the spinners come on and he can't capitalize, I find it really, really interesting. I'd have to do a way deeper dive into both of those players to give you a good look. But I can certainly see an argument. I mean, I always see an argument for DDS to bat at the top of the innings. I've been saying that for 5 years. But in this particular case, yeah, I could certainly see the argument and why a few people would be thinking that. Let's just have a look. Let's see what else we've got. Kartik says, why is the West Indies still a thing? This is a really important one that I don't think people actually understand. It's not just the West Indies that is more than one entity. Ireland is Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland playing as one team. And England is obviously the England and Wales Cricket Board. They play under England when they play international cricket. So I do find it interesting that the West Indies is talked about so much more than Ireland is. There's always tensions in Irish cricket between North and South. There just is. If I write an article and it's too dependent on someone from the North or from the South, I always get comments back from Irish fans. And it's, the same with the West Indies. I've got no problem with the West Indies playing in the West Indies. We've had a long history of it in cricket, haven't we? We've had East Africa. Is it East Africa? God, it was East Africa, wasn't it? Yeah, East Africa, which was Kenya, Uganda. I forget what the other country was. So we do have a long history of it in cricket. It doesn't bother me at all. Within the Caribbean, I've never seen a really strong movement to go against it. If they did do it in the Caribbean, occasionally maybe Barbados, Trinidad, or Jamaica would flare up and be really good. But are they not just basically then saying that they're going to be a minority team? And, they've played some good cricket over the last couple of years. They're obviously not as good as they were before the year 2000, but they've won 2 World Cups back in 2016 was their last one. Every time they lose, this is said. It's interesting that it's never said when they win, right? And they're going through some issues. There's absolutely, no doubt about that. There's some good people, though, that work for them as well. So it'd be really interesting to see where they go from here. Just seeing if we see anyone else here. And Nahal says, is it time for Cameron Green to come in for Mitch Marsh? I mean, Mitch Marsh won them the last World Cup. I think it would be huge to be able to make that change. Just on the pitch, just on his bowling, I should say. We finally saw Mitch Marsh bowling again. Didn't go particularly well, that 1 over. It was interesting to see Australia go back to the 3 different guys. I didn't think Stoinis was bowling particularly well either. They ended up with Maxwell, who got away with 1 over at the end there. On Cameron Green's bowling, I know he hasn't bowled much, but my memory is he's going at around 10 runs and over. He might end up being a very good T20 bowler, and he might have been very good on this surface, as your question says. I'm not sure he instantly improves the bowling, although going forward, I would hope that he does. But he just needs to play a lot more T20 cricket if he's going to be a good bowler. Let's have a see what else we got here. Just seeing if there's anything else. Adil says, which batter and bowler do you enjoy watching as a fan? Well, if we're just going on this tournament, I'm really getting into Tikshana as a bowler. Sikandar Raza has been fantastic. I've always loved Kusal Mendis, and he's made runs a couple of times. So I suppose those are... Obviously, Virat Kohli was incredible the other day. I always thought he'd be the best of the big 4. I'm not sure that's eventually going to be true. But he was the one I picked very early on in that big 4 group. So I certainly enjoy him. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else. Oh, Blessing Muzarambani is another one that I really, really like watching bowl. But yeah, I think it's been some really good cricket from a lot of players so far. So I've enjoyed a lot of it. Genuine says, very disappointing to see home fans not behind the Australian team. So I think they said there was 20,000 there. can't remember what that stadium holds. Is it 60,000? So it's about a third full. I've been saying this for a very long time, and Cricket Australia have to take part of the blame, but I think a lot of the blame just goes down to the way things happened in Australia. Australian cricket fans do not go to cricket outside of the summer. That is a really good crowd tonight. It may not have looked it because it's a massive stadium and there was only 20,000 there, and I'm sure Perth officials would be upset and the ICC would be upset that they didn't get more. But that is a really good cricket crowd for October on a, what day was it? Tuesday. A Tuesday in October. That was a really, really good cricket crowd in Perth. When the Big Bash started, I thought that was the perfect time to basically play it in February and March and extend the period out of which Australian cricket fans go to the games. Big Bash was already, fans were getting involved with it. There's no football codes at that time, so you could have played it before all the football codes get really serious. Had the chance of doing that, but they put the Big Bash right up against the international thing. And there's a reason that the Big Bash and the internationals are all played around January, December, and early February. And that's because that's when traditionally Australian cricket fans go to the grounds. So I know that might seem weird to other cultures, but Australia has the sort of the tightest summer. And for those 2 months, cricket is really big in Australia. The rest of the year, it's not. Australians don't take as much notice of tours as other cricket fans do. And when you've seen Australia play, watch Australia playing test matches out of season, even November sometimes, certainly October, certainly when they've tried to do the winter series, the fans don't turn up. It's been going on for a long time now. This is not particularly a new thing. Let's have a look. It's interesting that you say, Anand, that spinners are getting mauled in most games because the spinners have a better bowling average than the quick bowlers at this stage. I haven't looked at the runs per over. I think they're going at 0.7 runs an over less. So I'm not sure what this question comes from. Obviously, I probably took those stats halfway through what just happened in that last game, and things might change a little bit. But up until Stoinis, or Maxwell, I probably was looking at when Maxwell was hitting them, probably when I started looking at those figures. Up until then, I would have said that they were absolutely, spinners were doing very well. Surprisingly well, considering that Geelong and Hobart were the first two venues as well. Even, it's not like it's Adelaide and the SCG, for instance. Just see if there's anything else. Akeem says, why doesn't Wales have a cricket team? So there is a movement, a very small movement within Wales for them to have an independent cricket team. They've obviously produced England players, England captains even before. Glamorgan plays in county cricket. I think they didn't think that they would be that strong. Even Scotland, even though Scotland has had a cricket team for a very long time, most of the best players traditionally would have played in county cricket, and obviously Scottish players have gone on to play for England quite a lot. So it's really since the 1990s that Scotland has become more of a team on their own. Ireland obviously had that, their first sort of tick in the 90s when a lot of people from Australia and New Zealand and India went over there to work, and cricket got a little bit bigger, and then it's become what it's become. So traditionally, I suppose Wales, they have had a cricket team and they have played on their own. I'm trying to remember why. I came across one of their old games recently, but even when they have played, their best players have generally played for Glamorgan in that situation. And obviously not all the best players from Wales play for Glamorgan. The best, Robert Croft and Simon Jones are probably the two last big name Welsh players. There's just never been that same movement there. It wouldn't actually surprise me one day if that happens, because it's actually, I've heard more murmurings about Wales having, becoming an international team than I have about the West Indies disbanding. Weirdly enough, that's not how you would do it. Keem also says West Africa played. Yes, that might be true, but I'm trying to remember what they played in. But yeah, there's been a couple of hybrid teams. And not to mention that the first Women's World Cup, there was an international 11, which was actually South Africans. But it was during apartheid, so they called it an international 11. Just seeing if there's anything else here that is worth having a look at. Thanks for the questions, though, everyone. There's just so many. It's hard to get through them all. Ram, I'm going to finish on Ram's question. Oh, I've got to click on it. Oh, no. Ram says, why don't they play matches at the Telstra Dome, which has a closed roof? Is it the Telstra Dome now? Isn't it the Marvel Arena or something weird? Docklands, we call it, Ram, because it changes name so often that we have to call it Docklands, and it's in the Docklands. You say a few ODIs played there. I mean, Melbourne Renegades play there. It's their home ground. Would it help against rain delays? Yes, having a roof would help. Look, I said during the qualifying games, Australia has a stadium with a roof. We're playing a World Cup. We've got this ridiculous thing going on in South Africa with the South Africa-Zimbabwe game where South Africa are robbed. Zimbabwe, it's not safe for them to be out in the field. It probably wasn't safe for the South Africans to be out in the field. That game should not have gone ahead to the level that it did. When South Africa was bowling, certainly not when Zimbabwe was bowling. We have a stadium with a roof and we're not using it. I'm sure there's a reason why. Maybe it wasn't available. It's interesting that they picked Geelong when, Docklands is obviously, 55 minutes up the freeway away from that. They could have even played in Geelong and there, but there might have been another reason. But yeah, so essentially, you're right. I don't know the full reason. I haven't talked to anyone at the ICC about that. I'll try and send a message through and see if I can get anything back from anyone on why that might have been the case. But yes, I do find it a little bit ridiculous. Anyway, England, Ireland tomorrow, Afghanistan, New Zealand. We'll be back for the World Cup mood board at normal time, not this late edition. But thank you to everyone. It's been we've been getting really good viewers for these shows so far. We're going to keep going. Tomorrow we should be back around 2 p.m. British Standard Time, summertime. Sorry, I always say standard time. So work out what time it is in London at 2 p.m. and in your local time zone. But yeah, thank you to everyone. Obviously, we've had the go see the Mitch Johnson podcast that's out. We've also now announced the latest podcast on the 99.94 network, which is Australia on 99.94. So go and stick your thumb in that one as well and see how you feel. It's Bharat Sundaresan. So my podcast partner and Melinda Farrell, my former Cricinfo partner, I suppose, coming together for that one. So that should be a great show. Probably recording like now or maybe in the morning or something like that. But just a huge thanks to everyone who's been on here. Rate, review, subscribe, press the little bell icon things. All those things help us. And we're going to be here every day of the World Cup with the mood board on 99.94.